Hello and welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you are subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often. As Lorazzo checked the integrity of the energy shield of the long hull of the Event Horizon splitter, he suddenly came to a stop. He hadn't stopped because of any system failures or weak points that didn't meet spec, but simply because he was wondering about the consequences of success. What if the human volunteer became the first successful black hole driver from their little alliance? What if the human discovered something that benefited just humanity? And what if it changed the status quo of their shared territory in the galaxy? Lorazzo set his measuring device aside with a gentle click against the metallic surface of the workstation. The experimental ship loomed behind him, its sleek form dominating the hangar with its sheer size and weird proportions. His footsteps echoed across the clean floor as he walked towards the massive viewport that spanned the entire eastern wall of the launch facility. Through the reinforced transparent material, the enormous launching platform stretched out into the void like a metallic arm reaching for the stars. It would give the Event Horizon splitter its first wave of acceleration, propelling it toward the black hole. A celestial object currently invisible against the blackness of space, detectable only by the absence of stars in a perfectly circular area. As if a hole had been punched through the fabric of reality itself. Surrounding equipment glowed with pinpoints of blue and red light, creating a halo of artificial light around the platform. Lorazzo's eyes focused on his own reflection in the viewport for a moment, his image a distraction from the fact that humans were the only members of their temporary alliance who had volunteered for this dangerous dive. At 5 feet tall, he was of average height for an Arcrarian. His skin was blue, and whenever he blinked, his green eyelids flashed like emerald shutters. The two arms that extended from his slender torso were currently crossed, his long fingers holding the white fabric of his lab coat. The overhead lights reflected off his smooth, hairless head, creating a peculiar pattern of light that moved with each subtle shift of his posture. The 4 nostrils at the center of his face flared slightly as he exhaled, creating small clouds of condensation on the cool surface of the viewport. He closed his eyes and sighed, aware that there wasn't much he could do to stop the experiment now. He was considering the fact that at least one species from their frail coalition might, in the unlikely case of success, might be able to see the same truth the ancient species ever saw when they had performed this exact same experiment in the ancient past, some even awakening pyrokinesis or other mysterious traits. The strange environment of the black hole unlocking some fundamental truth of the universe that only a few could ever grasp. Legends told of beings returning with the ability to manipulate matter with their minds, to see through the illusion of linear time, or to communicate across vast distances without technology. The ancients had been transformed by their journey beyond the event horizon, gaining powers that had elevated them to near godhood before they eventually left the galaxy and disappeared from known space, leaving behind only fragments of knowledge that tantalized the younger races with possibilities.
"What are you doing staring at the viewport?"
A harsh voice suddenly tore Lorazzo from his thoughts.
"Have you finished the hull inspection?"
Lorazzo turned around and saw Vox-Mah, a Lidorian, the other member of the Triplice with the humans. Vox-Mah was bipedal like Lorazzo himself, but his white rubbery skin, full of flaps in their faces, set their species apart in appearance. Something the humans called molten candle look, in reply when the Lidorians expressed anything negative about the human form. The Lidorian stood a head taller than Lorazzo, his body seeming to shift and flow beneath his tight-fitting silver uniform. The flaps of skin on his face moved independently, revealing glimpses of the pink tissue beneath when he spoke, giving the impression of multiple mouths opening and closing with each word. "The hull inspection?" Lorazzo repeated, his voice rising slightly with incredulity. "What is there to inspect that hasn't already been checked dozens of times by the humans themselves?" If this project fails, no amount of hull inspections will save the human from being obliterated by the black hole. Voxmar's face moved, the flaps constricting to create what Lorazzo had learned to recognize as a smirk.
Is that your way of expressing that you would be okay if the dive was a failure? Or perhaps that is what you're hoping for?
Lorazzo's emerald eyelids flashed rapidly as he tried to defend himself. The humans deserved their little chance of success since they were the only ones who volunteered a pilot for the current iteration of the vehicle. All I'm saying is that there's a limit to how many times we can check the same systems. He paused, the blue skin around his mouth tightening. Though I don't know if their willingness to send one of their own into a black hole is a display of bravery or stupidity.
You don't need to measure your words with me, Lorazzo,
Voxmar said, moving closer until his tall form cast a shadow over the Agrarian.
My species, too, has been put in a tight spot with this display of stupidity. The humans are risking their pilot for the small chance to win something like what the ancient species did. But the most likely outcome is that the Event Horizon Splitter will fail, or that even if the pilot survives, he will return completely crazy. There's no lack of historical records for the time the ancients attempted the same experiment. Most who returned were permanently altered, and not always for the better.
Lorazzo saw an opening and finally gave voice to the thought that had been gnawing at him. It would be almost a bad joke if the humans succeeded. It hurts to think there is just a little chance they could be the big winners just because of some stupid courage. After all, 3 species had put an equal amount of effort into developing the vehicle. We've all contributed our best scientists, resources, and technology, yet only they stand to gain the ultimate prize. Voxmar nodded, the motion causing the light to play across the contours of his face in hypnotic patterns.
I agree, and I may have a solution, if you're willing to listen.
Lorazzo studied the Lidorian's face, reading the subtle shifts in his features that suggested he was about to hear something immoral, or perhaps even illegal. The slight tension in the folds of skin, the way the flaps seemed to curl inward protectively, these were all signs that Voxmar was proposing something that would not withstand scrutiny in the light of day, a solution that would remain in the shadows. "I'm listening," Lorazzo agreed nonetheless, his curiosity and self-interest overcoming his initial hesitation.
The Agrarians are responsible for the safety of the vehicle,
Voxmar said, his voice dropping to a whisper.
And we Lidorians handle the software. All our problems could be solved if you just allowed a small, unlogged update in the shield software. It's just something that would guarantee the mission concludes the way it's supposed to.
His flaps pulled back to reveal more pink tissue than Lorazzo had ever seen, a grotesque display of what passed for a sincere smile among Lidorians. Lorazzo's mind raced as he realized that Voxmar was likely planning to sabotage the Event Horizon Splitter, and that he needed Lorazzo's help to succeed. The implications cascaded through his thought like falling dominoes. If discovered, it would mean the end of the Alliance, possibly war between their species, certainly the end of his career in freedom. Yet, if successful, it would ensure that the humans gained no advantage, no evolutionary leap forward that might upset the delicate balance of power in their sector of the galaxy. And if he refused, Voxmar might find another way, one that could implicate Lorazzo's people regardless. In the end, he made his choice, pretending to himself that Voxmar was doing something wrong, and that he would just be someone who overlooked something once, an innocent bystander to sabotage, rather than a willing accomplice. "There will be a maintenance of the security systems after this shift," Lorazzo said, his voice carefully neutral. Any updates during that time would remain unlogged. Voxmar's face contorted in satisfaction, the flaps of skin undulating in a wave-like motion that Lorazzo found disturbing. The Lidorian bowed deeply, a formal gesture that seemed out of place given the conspiracy they had just formed, then retreated back to his station without saying a single word. His long form moved with a liquid grace that belied his size, disappearing around a corner with barely a sound. Lorazzo stood alone by the viewport, staring out at the launch platform where the Event Horizon Splitter would soon begin its journey. The fate of the human pilot who was too brave for his own good was already set in stone, as immutable as the gravitational pull of the black hole itself. He felt a mixture of two things, guilt and relief, knowing that the status quo would be preserved, even if it came at the cost of a single human life. It was a cold move, but in the vast equations of interspecies politics, sometimes individual variables had to suffer for the greater result. 1 week later, Lorazzo sat in his guest station, surrounded by various scientists of his species. The circular room was filled with curved workstations and floating flat displays, each attended by an Acrarian in a white lab coat identical to his own. From there, they watched the launch and monitored the data from the vehicle, though they couldn't interfere with anything, given that the species taking the risks had full control of the vehicle during the launching process. The humans had insisted on this arrangement, claiming it was their right as the ones offering the pilot. Lorazzo overheard comments from his colleagues about the possibility that humans might succeed, speculation that ranged from scholarly interest to concealed anxiety. Yet he himself was not so worried about it. What concerned him was the chance the humans might later learn that Voxmar had pushed an unauthorized software update to the vehicle, and that it somehow happened under his species' watch. But since it all happened during the maintenance of the security systems, he was sure neither he nor his species could be blamed in any way for this. The Lidorian had been clever in his sabotage, targeting a subsystem of the energy shield that would only fail under the extreme conditions near the event horizon, making it look like a design flaw rather than deliberate tampering. Something else was bothering him too. Every time he looked at the live feed from the vehicle's cabin, the pilot's face, Caden Morgan, stared back at him. The human had olive skin and dark, cropped hair, with eyes that seemed to contain an impossible depth of determination. The lack of visible worry on his face was almost a slap to Lorazzo's face, and the hopeful words he uttered were like a bad joke, his speech thanking the species from the Alliance, hitting harder than a knife to his heart. The human spoke of unity, of shared discovery, of breaking boundaries together, all while unknowingly heading toward a sabotaged mission, betrayed by the very allies he praised. Stupid human. That's all Lorazzo thought, but didn't voice, the words bitter even in the privacy of his mind. How could anyone face such likely death with hope rather than terror? It was incomprehensible to him. The minutes passed with agonizing slowness, and the tension in the human control room was visible through the live feeds. Dozens of them crowded around consoles, their expressions intense, movements stiff. A simulation of the launching played on repeat on one of their screens, always including the trip back out of the black hole. The whole human team likely having some degree of trust in the vehicle they all had helped to build. The simulation showed the ship entering the event horizon, then emerging at a precisely calculated point, riding the gravitational waves like a surfer on an ocean. A beautiful theory that Lorazzo knew would never be put to the test. Lorazzo didn't understand why the humans decided to do a countdown from 10 to 0, a ritual that seemed unnecessarily dramatic to him. He wasn't truly tense until the launching sequence actually started, the massive engines of the platform igniting with a silent flash that was visible even from their distance, the lack of sound in space making the spectacle seem almost dreamlike. He wondered if Voxmar had done something that would cause a failure too early. considering the implications in case the humans were able to recover the vehicle and investigate. That hadn't been their arrangement. The failure was supposed to occur only past the event horizon, when no evidence could be retrieved. If the ship failed before reaching the black hole, there would be questions, investigations, and the possibility of discovering the sabotage. Lorazzo's heart pounded in his chest, his breathing shallow as he watched the screens. The vehicle accelerated through the giant launching platform, a silver needle against the black canvas of space, trailing blue energy from its propulsion system. It pierced through the void toward the black hole, a journey of several minutes compressed into a breathless silence as all eyes remained fixed on the telemetry data. The event horizon splitter survived the initial gravitational forces, its path bending as it approached the point of no return. Then, without ceremony, it disappeared inside the event horizon, swallowed by the absolute darkness from which not even light could escape. Lorazzo thought to himself that Voxmar had truly done a good job, the sabotage invisible right up to the critical moment. He felt a little bad for the humans in the control room, who were staring at their screens with hope that everything would be normal, that their calculations and theories would prove correct. Some were holding hands, others were muttering prayers to deities Lorazzo didn't recognize, all united in their desperate wish for their comrade's safe return. Their faith in their technology, in their pilot, in the universe itself, seemed both admirable and foolish to Lorazzo. Time passed, and there was no sign of return around the scheduled time. Silence continued in the human control room, the initial excitement giving way to growing dread that none of them voiced, but all of them felt. A few of Lorazzo's own scientists around him started to comment that the vehicle had not been tested enough, and that such a result was predictable. They spoke in low tones, technical analyses masking what was essentially a collective sigh of relief. The natural order would be preserved. No species would gain an advantage. The price of one human life seemed small in the cosmic balance. Suddenly, a new reading appeared on all screens, showing that a warping of space was detected around the edge of the event horizon. The data was unmistakable. Something was emerging from the black hole, riding the gravitational waves exactly as the simulation had predicted. The human control room erupted into motion, technicians shouting coordinates, controllers ensuing rapid-fire commands. A rescue team was dispatched to recover the vehicle, their ship already prepped and waiting for this moment, a clear example of the human's stubborn optimism. Lorazzo couldn't believe it when the human delegation appeared on the main screen, the lead scientist's face flushed with excitement as he invited both allied species to meet the pilot and inspect the vehicle, saying they had confirmed he was alive. Lorazzo stood from his seat, his legs unsteady beneath him, wondering what had happened. The sabotage had failed, or worse, had been discovered and neutralized. He couldn't think of any other possibility. Either way, the consequences would spread through their alliance like a shockwave, as his colleagues rushed around him, preparing to join the humans at the recovery site. Lorazzo remained frozen, staring at the screen where the impossible had just become reality. The event horizon splitter had returned from the black hole, and with it, perhaps, secrets that were never meant to be known. Lorazzo followed his colleagues through the sterile corridors of the station, their excitement contrasting to the dread pooling in his stomach. Each step brought him closer to a confrontation he had never anticipated, facing a human who should be dead, who had survived what was meant to be certain doom. The lights seemed too bright, the air too thin, as his mind raced through possibilities, none of them pleasant. Would the human know? Could their species have detected the sabotage? Or worse, had Voxmar made a mistake? The ancient records spoke of those who returned with inexplicable knowledge, with insights that transcended normal perception. What if the human had gained something from this trip? They entered the observation deck where representatives from all three species had gathered. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation, scientists whispering theories, officials preparing statements. And through the reinforced glass, Lorazzo could see the Event Horizon splitter being guided into the recovery bay, its hull gleaming as if it was brand new despite the journey it had undertaken.
"It doesn't make sense,"
one of his colleagues whispered behind him.
"Why isn't there any damage to the painting?"
"Perhaps the humans made modifications without informing us," Lorazzo suggested, grasping at any explanation that might deflect suspicion.
"Impossible. We monitored all changes to the design."
Lorazzo fell silent, watching as the recovery team secured the vehicle and prepared to extract the pilot. Medical personnel stood by with equipment designed for human physiology, while recording devices captured every moment of this historic event. The hatch of the Event Horizon splitter opened, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, silhouetted against the bright interior lights of the ship, a figure appeared. Caden Morgan stepped out, moving with deliberate grace that seemed somehow different from before. His eyes surveyed the gathered crowd, and when they landed on Lorazzo, the Aquarian felt a chill through his body that had nothing to do with the station's temperature. The human smiled, a gesture that should have been reassuring, but instead filled Lorazzo with inexplicable dread. Caden raised his hand in a wave, and as he did, his eyes moved somewhere else, leaving Lorazzo wondering if he was overreacting. 5 hours later, Lorazzo sat stiffly in the high-backed chair of the station's main conference room. The curved table before him was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the anxious faces of both Aquarian and Lidorian delegations. They had pressured the humans to bring their pilot here for questioning, insisting it was a matter of Alliance protocol, though Lorazzo knew the real reason. The leadership of both non-human species had been in a barely concealed panic since the Event Horizon splitter had emerged from the black hole intact. Lorazzo noticed how Darax, the Aquarian High Counselor, kept tapping his long blue fingers against the table, a nervous tick that betrayed his concern. The Lidorian representatives were equally tense, their facial flaps stiff with suppressed agitation. It was clear to Lorazzo that their leaders were worried the human might have learned something profound about the nature of the universe during his impossible journey, and even more worried that the humans might refuse to share such knowledge. The ancient records all spoke of transformative revelations, of secrets that could elevate a species to unimaginable power. If the humans had gained such insight, the balance of their fragile alliance would be irreparably shifted. Near the head of the table, Vox Ma and Terox Zir, the chief Lidorian engineer, were engaged in an intense discussion with several Aquarian scientists. Lorazzo edged closer to listen. "Access to the vehicle is equally important as speaking with the pilot," Terox Zir insisted, his voice a harsh whisper. "The ship's systems may have recorded data beyond what the human could consciously perceive. Our teams designed the shield technology," an Aquarian scientist countered. "We have the right to examine it first." Vox Ma's face contorted in what Lorazzo recognized as frustration.
"Time is of the essence. The longer we wait, the more opportunity the humans have to extract and hide valuable data."
Lorazzo shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He might be the only member of his species who truly understood why the Lidorians were so desperate to access the vehicle. They needed to erase any trace of their sabotage before it could be discovered. The double doors at the far end of the conference room slid open with a long hiss. The assembled scientists fell silent as the human delegation entered. First came Caden Morgan, the pilot, his steps natural but somehow off rhythm, as if he was still adjusting to the station's gravity. Behind him walked the human lead scientist, a stern-faced man with silver-streaked hair whom Lorazzo knew was called Hanzo. 4 human guards in dark uniforms followed, their expressions impassive but their posture alert. Caden Morgan looked physically unchanged from before his mission, the same olive skin, dark hair, and athletic build, but something in his gaze seemed different. His eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail with an intensity that made Lorazzo's skin prickle with unease. Hanzo spoke first, his deep voice filling the conference room.
On behalf of humanity, I thank you for your concern regarding Pilot Morgan's well-being.
He gestured to the guards standing at attention behind them.
I must apologize for the security detail, but it's a necessary precaution. The pilot has been somewhat unstable since the mission. As you are aware, there was a shield failure during the dive, and it's frankly a miracle that he made it out of the black hole at all. We're still trying to understand exactly what happened in there.
Terox Zir leaned forward, his facial flaps quivering with barely contained impatience. We would prefer to hear directly from the pilot about his experience. Yes, Derax Mull added. Has he described what he saw beyond the event horizon? Hanzo smiled diplomatically.
Pilot Morgan is still processing the experience, the trauma of nearly dying.
Did the gravitational lensing effect create any unusual visual phenomena?
Interrupted an Acrarian physicist. Hanzo began to answer.
Our initial analysis suggests...
Was there a moment when consciousness seemed to separate from physical form?
A Lidorian neurologist cut in. With each question, Hanzo provided vague, technical responses that revealed nothing of substance. The pilot himself remained silent throughout, his eyes continuing to scan the room, occasionally fixing on an individual for uncomfortably long moments before moving on. Enough prevarication, Derax Mull finally said, rising slightly from his seat. We request direct communication with the pilot, now.
Indeed,
agreed the Lidorian delegation head.
The Alliance Agreement stipulates shared access to all Discovery data.
Hanzo sighed and glanced at Caden, who had been staring at the ceiling lights with peculiar fascination.
Very well. You may interview the pilot, but I must warn you, he's been speaking somewhat incoherently since his return. We brought him here at your insistence, against medical recommendation.
Has the pilot learned anything? Asked both the Acrarian and Lidorian leaders almost in unison, their voices overlapping in their eagerness.
About the fundamental nature of the universe?
Caden Morgan's head snapped down from his contemplation of the ceiling, and he let out a laugh, a high, broken sound that echoed unnaturally in the conference room. Even the human guards shifted uncomfortably at the sound, exchanging concerned glances. Silence fell for several uncomfortable seconds, stretching like an elastic band ready to snap. Finally, the pilot spoke, his voice surprisingly clear and steady after his unsettling laughter. I did learn something. His eyes focused for the first time since entering the room. The lights were blinking because of a shield failure. I was certain I would die when I decided to take a look inside the black hole anyway. He paused, his expression distant. I saw something I can't describe. Not really. There aren't words for it in any language I know. Try, urged Terox Zir, leaning forward so far that his torso was nearly horizontal across the table. You must try to explain what you witnessed. The pilot laughed again, the sound slightly less manic, but no less disturbing. I'm not sure what to say, except that I now know time, space, gravity, and energy are basically the same thing. He grabbed a water bottle from the center of the table with surprising quickness. The true nature of the universe isn't molecules or atoms or even smaller particles. He unscrewed the cap and began pouring water into a glass. Everything is connected, like a spider web. His eyes seemed to focus on something invisible between the droplets of water. And it can be changed, controlled, by pulling the right string. That's what I did when I recreated the failing shield with just the power of my mind. An awkward silence fell over the human delegation. Several of them exchanged alarmed glances, Hanzo clearing his throat loudly.
I think that's enough for now. Morgan clearly needs time to rest and undergo further—
No. The pilot interrupted, shaking his head vigorously. I'm fine. Really, I'm not sure if I'm in my right mind. He looked directly at Lorazzo then, and the Aquarian felt pinned by his gaze. But I don't know what I saw. I know what I did. Lorazzo didn't doubt for a minute that the human might be telling the truth. Something in the pilot's eyes, a clarity that cut through his apparent madness, convinced Lorazzo that Caden Morgan had indeed experienced something transformative inside the black hole.
Perhaps we should continue this another time,
Hanzo suggested gently, placing a hand on the pilot's shoulder.
Would you like to rest a bit?
Yes, Morgan agreed, but then suddenly held up a finger. But not before proving I'm not crazy. He grabbed the water bottle again, clutching it like it contained precious treasure instead of simple hydrogen and oxygen. I'll turn this into ice. I just need to find the right string to pull. The pilot closed his eyes in concentration, his face contorting with effort. Strange, guttural noises emerged from his throat, clicks and sounds that made Lorazzo's skin crawl, but the water in the bottle remained stubbornly liquid, sloshing gently with the pilot's trembling hands. After nearly a minute of this uncomfortable display, Hanzo stepped forward and firmly took the bottle from Morgan's hands.
I think that's quite enough demonstration for today.
He turned to the two other delegations with a tight smile.
Before we go, perhaps Pilot Morgan would like to thank our allies personally for their concern.
The pilot nodded vaguely and began moving around the table, mechanically shaking hands with the scientists and officials. When he reached Lorazzo, however, he stopped abruptly. His eyes locked with the Aquarians, and for many uncomfortable seconds, neither moved. Not this one, Morgan said softly, but clearly enough for everyone to hear. He is evil. Lorazzo felt his heart stutter in his chest. The accusation hung in the air like a poisonous gas. He glanced at the other humans, seeing confusion and surprise in their expressions. Clearly, they didn't share their pilot's assessment. Hanzo quickly stepped between them, his face flushed with embarrassment.
Please forgive Pilot Morgan's behavior. The stress of his experience has clearly affected his judgment.
He took the pilot by the elbow.
We'll continue this discussion after he's had proper rest and medical evaluation.
The human delegation withdrew quickly, the guards closing ranks around Morgan as they left. The pilot looked back once as the doors closed behind him, his eyes finding Lorazzo's with unnerving accuracy. After the humans departed, both species relaxed visibly, their postures loosening with collective relief. The human has clearly been driven mad by his experience, Derax Mole declared, satisfaction evident in his tone.
Indeed, agreed Terox Zir. Such babbling about strengths and mental powers. Classic psychosis, induced by extreme stress.
Lorazzo listened as his colleagues convinced themselves that the pilot had learned nothing of value, that the mission had been a failure after all, just not in the way they had anticipated. They were relieved that the natural order would remain undisturbed. As the meeting broke up, the individuals filed out of the conference room, already discussing the technical data they hoped to extract from the vehicle itself. Voxmar lingered behind, waiting until they were alone before approaching Lorazzo.
Remember, you're in this with me,
the Lidorian whispered, his facial flaps drawn tight against his face.
I expect you'll do your best to destroy any evidence of our little interference.
Without waiting for a response, he turned and left, his silver uniform reflecting the overhead lights as he disappeared through the doorway. Alone in the conference room, Lorazzo sank back into his chair, contemplating the terrible weight of his decisions. He had helped sabotage the mission out of fear of change, fear of humans gaining an advantage. Now, the survivor had called him evil, had somehow known his guilt just by looking at him. The only thing keeping his sanity intact was the prospect that the human had indeed gone crazy, that his accusation was merely a coincidence, that his talk of pulling strings was nothing but the ramblings of a mind broken by trauma. The room was silent except for the sound of the station's air systems. Lorazzo stood to leave, his thoughts heavy with guilt and uncertainty. As he left, however, the water bottle on the table fell to the floor with a soft thud. It shattered on impact, but instead of liquid splashing across the polished surface, it broke into countless icy shards that skittered across the floor like crystal insects. Lorazzo stared at the impossible ice, his breath catching in his throat. Whatever had happened to Caden Morgan in that black hole, whatever he had learned or become, Lorazzo was suddenly certain of one thing. The change he had feared so much was now a reality.